They shot down his P-51. So he stole a German fighter and flew home. A complete 12 500-word TTS optimized script. Idu Chapter 1. 90 Seconds to Live. November 2nd, 1944. 3:47 in the afternoon. Somewhere over the frozen hills of Czechoslovakia, Lieutenant Bruce Carr stared at the oil pressure gauge. The needle was falling, dropping past the yellow warning zone, plunging into the red. And then it hit zero. Zero oil pressure means one thing: death. Black smoke began pouring from the cowling of his P-51 Mustang. Not wisps of smoke, not a thin trail, a thick, choking cloud that streamed past his canopy and blocked his view of the horizon. The Merlin engine screamed, metal grinding against metal, a high-pitched shriek that cut through the roar of combat, a sound that every pilot dreads, the sound of an engine tearing itself apart from the inside 30 seconds ago. Bruce Carr was leading a strafing run against a German airfield. His 450 caliber machine guns had been hammering a row of parked Junkers bombers. He had watched one of them explode, felt the satisfaction of another successful mission. Now he was a dead man flying. Flak. An 88mm shell fragment had punched through the engine compartment. The German gunners on the ground had found their mark. A piece of hot metal no bigger than a man's thumb had severed the oil line that kept the Rolls-Royce Merlin alive. Without oil, the engine would seize in approximately 90 seconds. The pistons would weld themselves to the cylinder walls. The crankshaft would lock solid, and then the propeller would become a 400-pound anchor hanging off the nose of his aircraft. After that, the P-51 Mustang would become a glider, but not a good glider. The Mustang had the aerodynamic properties of a brick when its engine quit. It would drop like a stone, and Bruce Carr would drop with it. He had one option: bail out. The procedure was simple. He had practiced it 100 times in training. Pull back the canopy, roll the aircraft inverted, drop out of the cockpit, count to 3, pull the ripcord. Simple, unless you were 200 miles behind enemy lines. Unless the ground below was crawling with German soldiers who would love nothing more than to capture an American pilot. Unless the temperature was dropping below freezing and you had no food, no water, and no way to call for help. Carr pulled back the canopy. The freezing Czechoslovakian air hit him like a fist. The wind roared past at 300 miles per hour. His goggles pressed hard against his face. He rolled the dying Mustang inverted. The world flipped upside down. The gray sky became the ground. The brown earth became the ceiling. And then he dropped. The sensation of falling is unlike anything else. For the first 2 seconds, there is no feeling of speed, just silence. Just the strange peace of being suspended between heaven and earth. Then the wind hits, the terminal velocity builds, the ground rushes up to meet you. At 8,000 feet, Carr pulled the ripcord. The silk canopy deployed with a violent jerk. His harness bit into his shoulders. His descent slowed from 120 miles per hour to 15. He was alive. But as he drifted down through the cold November air, Bruce Carr looked at the landscape below him. Enemy territory stretched to every horizon, forests, fields, small villages with German trucks parked in the squares, roads filled with military convoys. He was 200 miles behind German lines. No radio. His survival radio had been damaged in the bailout. No weapon except a Colt .45 pistol with 7 rounds. 7 bullets against the entire German army. No food, no water, no map, no compass. November in Central Europe. The days were short, the nights were long, and the temperature dropped below freezing as soon as the sun went down. The mathematics of survival were brutal. American pilots shot down over occupied territory had a 23% chance of evading capture and returning to Allied lines. That meant for every 4 pilots who went down, 3 of them would spend the rest of the war in a German prison camp. Or worse. Some ended up in unmarked graves. Shot while trying to escape, beaten by angry civilians whose homes had been bombed, executed by SS units who did not follow the Geneva Convention. 23%, less than 1 in 4. Bruce Carr was about to become the exception to every statistic ever written about downed pilots. Because in 4 days, he would not just escape, he would not just evade capture and make his way back to Allied lines. He would steal one of the most advanced fighter aircraft in the German arsenal. He would teach himself to fly it in the dark, and he would fly it 200 miles home while every gun in Europe tried to shoot him down. This is his story. The lesson before the story. Before I continue with what happened next, I want to share something important with you. This story is not just about a pilot who stole a plane. It is not just a tale of adventure and survival. It is about a fundamental truth that separates those who overcome impossible situations from those who surrender to them. Here is the truth. When life corners you, when every option seems closed, when the rational choice is to give up and accept your fate, you have a decision to make. You can accept that your options are limited to the ones that seem possible. Or you can ask a different question. What else can I do? That single question changed everything for Bruce Carr. It turned a hopeless situation into an opportunity. It transformed a prisoner of war into a legend. It made the impossible possible. And that same question might change everything for you too. Throughout this story, I am going to share the specific lessons that made Bruce Carr extraordinary. Not because he was born with special gifts, not because he had advantages that others lacked, but because he thought differently than most people think. And thinking differently is something anyone can learn. If you find value in stories that teach you how to overcome impossible odds, make sure to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Because every week, I share true stories of ordinary people who accomplished extraordinary things, and I break down the lessons you can apply to your own life. Now let me tell you how a farm kid from upstate New York became the only American pilot in World War II to take off in a P-51 Mustang and return in a stolen German fighter. Chapter 2. The boy who learned to fly, Bruce Ward Carr, was born on January 28, 1924, in Union Springs, New York. Union Springs was a small town, population under 2,000, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the biggest excitement was the county fair in August, where boys grew up expecting to work the same farms their fathers and grandfathers had worked. There was nothing remarkable about Bruce Carr's childhood. His family was not wealthy. They were not poor either, just ordinary working people in an ordinary small town during the years of the Great Depression. His father worked hard. His mother kept the house. Bruce went to school, did his chores, played with the other boys. Nothing that would suggest he would one day become one of the most decorated fighter pilots in American history, except for one thing. At 15 years old, in the summer of 1939, Bruce Carr learned to fly. The year matters more than you might think. In September of 1939, Germany invaded Poland. World War II began. The newsreels showed German Stuka dive bombers screaming down on Polish cities. German tanks rolling across the countryside. The beginning of a war that would eventually kill 60 million people. A 15-year-old farm kid in upstate New York could not know that within 5 years he would be dogfighting Messerschmitts over Berlin. He could not know that the skill he was learning for fun would one day save his life and the lives of countless others. But some part of him must have sensed that flying was about to become the most important skill a young man could possess. He did not learn in a military program. He did not attend a formal flight school. There was no money for that. Instead, a local crop duster named Earl let the kid take the controls of his biplane one summer afternoon. Earl was an old barnstormer, one of those pilots from the 1920s who had learned to fly in the years after World War I. He had spent years flying county fairs, doing loops and rolls for crowds of amazed farmers, taking passengers up for $5 rides. By 1939, Earl was too old for the fancy flying. He made his living dusting crops, flying low over fields of corn and wheat, spraying pesticides from a converted biplane that had seen better days. But he still loved to teach. He saw something in young Bruce Carr. Maybe it was the way the boy watched the planes overhead. Maybe it was the questions he asked about airspeed and altitude and how the wings created lift. Maybe Earl just recognized a kindred spirit. Whatever the reason, he invited Bruce up for a ride, and then he let him take the controls. The moment Bruce Carr's hands closed around that stick, his life changed forever. The feeling of flight is difficult to describe to someone who has never experienced it. The freedom of leaving the ground behind, the power of controlling a machine that can take you anywhere, the view of the world spread out below you like a living map. For Bruce Carr, it was love at first flight. He was hooked. From that day forward, every spare moment went into flying. Every dollar he earned went toward more flight time. He worked odd jobs around town, helped farmers with their harvests, did whatever it took to earn enough money for another hour in the air. By the time he turned 16, Bruce Carr had more stick time than most Army Air Corps cadets, while other boys his age were playing baseball and chasing girls. He was learning to land in crosswinds, learning to navigate by landmarks, learning to feel the aircraft as an extension of his own body. He did not know he was preparing for war. He thought he was just doing what he loved. But preparation has a way of meeting opportunity, and opportunity was coming. The first lesson. Preparation creates opportunity. Here is something most people never understand about luck. Luck is not random. It is not a matter of being in the right place at the right time by pure chance. Luck is preparation, meeting opportunity. The opportunity to steal a German fighter plane would mean nothing to a pilot who did not know how to fly. It would mean nothing to someone who had not spent years developing the instincts and skills that make flight possible. But Bruce Carr had been preparing for 5 years before he ever joined the military. 5 years of flying whenever he could. 5 years of learning the feel of an aircraft. 5 years of building the foundation that would one day save his life. When he enlisted on September 3rd, 1942, he was 18 years old, but he already had 240 flight hours logged. 240 hours of experience that most new pilots would take years to accumulate. His instructor at the Aviation Cadet Training Program turned out to be the same man who had taught him to fly 3 years earlier. Earl had joined up too. The old barnstormer had traded his crop duster for a training aircraft and was now teaching the next generation of military pilots. Earl took one look at Carr's application. He saw the flight hours already logged. He saw the experience that set this young man apart from every other cadet in the program. And he recommended Bruce Carr for the accelerated program. While other cadets were still learning the basics, Carr was mastering advanced maneuvers. While others struggled with navigation, he flew with the confidence of someone who had been doing it for years. While others washed out under the pressure, he excelled. By August of 1943, Carr was a flight officer. By February of 1944, he was in England, assigned to the 380th Fighter Squadron, 363rd Fighter Group, 9th Air Force. His first assignment was to fly the P-51 Mustang, the finest fighter aircraft in the world. The preparation he did not know he was doing at 15 years old made everything possible at 20 years old. Ask yourself this question right now. What are you preparing for without knowing it? What skills are you building today that will save you tomorrow? What knowledge are you accumulating that will become invaluable when the moment comes? The answer matters more than you think, because opportunity does not wait for you to get ready. Opportunity arrives on its own schedule. The only question is whether you will be prepared when it appears. Chapter 3: The Weapon That Changed the War. The North American P-51 Mustang was the finest propeller-driven fighter aircraft ever built. This is not opinion. This is not American patriotism. This is simple fact, supported by every metric that matters in aerial combat. Let me give you the numbers, because the numbers tell a story that words cannot capture. Range: 1,650 miles with drop tanks. That is enough to escort bombers from England to Berlin and back. No other fighter in the world could match that range. Before the Mustang, American bombers flew into Germany alone. After the Mustang, they had protection all the way to the target. Top speed: 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, faster than any German fighter except the new jet-powered Me-262. And the jets were rare. Most German pilots flew the Bf-109 or the Fw-190. Both were slower than the Mustang at altitude. Service ceiling: 41,900 feet. The Mustang could fly higher than almost any aircraft in the German arsenal. Height means energy. Energy means options. Options mean survival. Armament: 650 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, 1,880 rounds total. Enough firepower to shred a German bomber in a 2-second burst. Enough ammunition for multiple engagements before needing to return to base. The heart of the Mustang was the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, 12 cylinders, 1,695 horsepower, supercharged for high-altitude performance, the same engine that powered the British Spitfire, the same engine that had won the Battle of Britain. But what made the Mustang special was not just its engine. It was the combination of range, speed, and firepower in one airframe. No other aircraft offered all three. Before the P-51D arrived in numbers, American daylight bombing raids suffered catastrophic losses. October 14, 1943, the Second Schweinfurt raid, the 8th Air Force sent 291 B-17 Flying Fortress bombers to attack German ball-bearing factories. The bombers flew without fighter escort because no American fighter had the range to accompany them. The Luftwaffe was waiting. 60 B-17s were shot down. 142 more were damaged. Many of them so badly they would never fly again. Over 600 American airmen were killed, wounded, or captured in a single day. The loss rate exceeded 20%. If those losses continued, the bomber force would be destroyed within weeks. The entire strategy of daylight precision bombing was failing. The Mustang changed everything. Beginning in early 1944, P-51s began escorting bomber formations all the way to their targets. For the first time, American fighters could stay with the bombers during the most dangerous part of the mission. For the first time, the Luftwaffe had to fight their way through determined opposition before reaching the bombers. German pilots called the Mustangs Die Langnasigen Bastard. The long-nosed bastards, they learned to fear the distinctive silhouette of the P-51, that long nose, those squared-off wingtips, the bubble canopy that gave the pilot 360 degrees of visibility. The Luftwaffe began hemorrhaging experienced pilots faster than training schools could replace them. German aces who had survived hundreds of missions fell to the guns of American Mustangs. The average experience level of German pilots dropped from years to months to weeks. By D-Day in June of 1944, the Allies had achieved air superiority over Western Europe. The German Air Force still existed. They still posed a threat. But they could no longer control the skies. The Mustang had won the air war. Chapter 4, The Pilot and His Plane. Bruce Carr fell in love with the P-51 the moment he climbed into the cockpit. The fit was perfect. His feet found the rudder pedals naturally. His right hand closed around the control stick as if it had been designed for him. His left hand rested on the throttle quadrant, feeling the power that waited at his command. The cockpit of the Mustang was cramped by civilian standards. Barely enough room for a man of average size. Instruments packed the panel in front of him. Switches and controls filled every available space. But to a fighter pilot, it was home. The visibility was excellent. The bubble canopy offered an unobstructed view in every direction. No blind spots where an enemy could hide. No struts or frames blocking the view at critical moments. The controls were responsive, light and precise. The aircraft did exactly what the pilot told it to do. No lag, no hesitation. A thought in the pilot's mind became an action in the aircraft almost instantly. And the power was intoxicating. 1,695 horsepower, more than any automobile, more than most locomotives. All of it controlled by a single lever under his left hand. Push the throttle forward and the Merlin screamed. The acceleration pressed him back into his seat. The speed built faster than any earthbound vehicle could match. Carr named his plane Angel's Playmate. He had it painted on the nose in flowing script. His personal aircraft, his partner in combat, his ticket home. He spent hours in that cockpit, learning every gauge, memorizing every procedure, practicing until the movements became automatic, until he no longer had to think about flying, until flying was as natural as walking. The bond between a fighter pilot and his aircraft is difficult to explain to someone who has never experienced it. The plane becomes an extension of the pilot's body. Its wings become his wings, its engine becomes his heart, its guns become his fists. Bruce Carr and Angel's Playmate became one. He had no idea that in 8 months he would be sitting in a very different cockpit, one with German labels on every gauge, one with a swastika painted on the tail. One he had never seen before and would have to learn in the dark of night while surrounded by enemies. But when that moment came, the skills he had built in the Mustang would transfer. The instincts he had developed would apply. Because although the labels were different, the physics remained the same. Throttle, stick, rudder, lift, drag, thrust. The language of flight is universal. Chapter 5. First Blood, March 8, 1944. Flight Officer Carr was flying his sixth combat mission, a fighter sweep over Germany, looking for targets of opportunity, looking for trouble. He found it. At 15,000 feet over the German countryside, Carr spotted a Messerschmitt Bf 109 flying below him. The German pilot had not seen him yet. The sun was at Carr's back. He was invisible. This is the moment every fighter pilot trains for. The bounce, the ambush, the kill. Carr pushed the stick forward. The Mustang's nose dropped. The airspeed indicator began climbing. 300 miles per hour. 350, 400. The Bf 109 grew larger in his gun sight, filling the reticle, center mass. Perfect firing position. But the German pilot saw him at the last second. Some instinct, some flash of reflected sunlight, some sixth sense that combat pilots develop or die. The 109 broke hard left, diving for the deck. The German pilot was trying to escape by flying low, using the terrain for cover, hoping to shake his pursuer in the treetops. Carr followed. What happened next was not textbook flying. It was not the careful, by-the-book combat that instructors taught. It was raw, aggressive, instinctive pursuit. The chase covered 40 miles at speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour. Both aircraft barely clearing the German forests. The trees were a green blur beneath them. One mistake, one moment of inattention, one slight misjudgment, and either aircraft would cartwheel through the forest at 400 miles per hour. Carr did not care. He wanted the kill. He fired. The 650 caliber machine guns roared. Tracers arced toward the fleeing Messerschmitt. The rounds missed. He fired again, adjusted his aim, led the target a little more. One bullet clipped the 109's left wing. A small hit. Not fatal, but it was enough. The German pilot panicked. He pulled back on the stick, climbing, trying to gain altitude, trying to escape. But he was too low. The climb took him to barely 300 feet. He ejected. The canopy flew off. The seat fired. The pilot separated from his dying aircraft. But 300 feet is not enough altitude for a parachute to deploy. The silk canopy began to blossom, began to catch air. But gravity is merciless. The pilot hit the ground at 60 miles per hour. The Bf 109, now pilotless, nosed over and crashed into a hillside, a ball of orange flame, a column of black smoke. Carr circled the wreckage once. Then he turned for home. He returned to base expecting congratulations. He had engaged the enemy. He had forced a German pilot to his death. He had survived his first real dogfight. Instead, his commanding officer called him into the office. The commander's face was not pleased. His voice was cold. Carr, that was the most over-aggressive flying I have ever witnessed. You nearly killed yourself chasing that German into the trees. You violated every safety protocol we have. You risked a $300,000 aircraft for one kill. You are being transferred. The kill did not count. Technically, Carr did not shoot the plane down. The pilot killed himself trying to escape. It went into the records as a probable, not a confirmed victory. Carr was transferred to a different unit, punishment for his recklessness. But here is what the commanding officer did not understand. He had just seen the first sign of what made Bruce Carr different from other pilots. Where others saw recklessness, Carr saw calculated risk. Where others saw limits, he saw suggestions. Where others saw rules that must be followed, he saw guidelines that could be bent when the situation demanded. This tendency would nearly get him killed several times. It would also save his life in a Czechoslovakian forest. It would make him an ace. It would earn him the Distinguished Service Cross. Bruce Carr did not think like other pilots, and that made all the difference. Chapter 6, Becoming an Ace. May 1944. Carr transferred to the 353rd Fighter Squadron, 354th Fighter Group, the Pioneer Mustang Group. This was an elite unit, the first Army Air Forces unit in Europe to fly P-51s in combat. The pilots were handpicked, the best of the best, aggressive, skilled, hungry for kills. Carr fit right in. June 17, 1944. 11 days after D-Day, Allied forces were fighting their way through the hedgerows of Normandy. The air above was a constant battlefield. Carr's flight encountered a formation of German FW-19s near the beachhead. A swirling dogfight erupted. Aircraft twisted and turned. Tracers crisscrossed the sky. Planes fell burning from the combat. When the smoke cleared, Carr had his first official kill. He shared credit for an FW-190 destroyed, his first confirmed victory. 2 months later, he was promoted to second lieutenant. September 12, 1944. Carr's flight was on a strafing mission. Their target was a German airfield deep in enemy territory. Intelligence reported a concentration of Junkers Ju-88 bombers, twin-engine aircraft that were terrorizing Allied shipping in the English Channel. The attack was devastating. Carr and his wingmen screamed across the airfield at 50 feet. Their combined firepower tore through the parked aircraft. Fuel tanks exploded. Ammunition cooked off. Several Ju-88s were destroyed before they could even start their engines. On the return flight, climbing out of enemy territory, they spotted something that made Carr's heart race. 30 FW-190s, 2,000 feet below them, flying in a loose formation, heading east. Standard tactics would say, report the contact and disengage. 30 against 4 is not good odds. The prudent move would be to go home and let someone else handle it. Carr did not hesitate. He pushed the nose over and dived. His wingmen followed without question. They had learned to trust Carr's instincts. When he said go, they went. The Germans never saw them coming. The sun was at the Americans' backs. The Mustangs came out of the glare like avenging angels. In the next 3 minutes, Bruce Carr shot down 3 German fighters, 3 confirmed kills in a single engagement. His gun's camera recorded each one. An FW-190 exploding under his fire, another spinning down, trailing smoke, a third disintegrating as the .50 caliber rounds found the fuel tank. When his wingman took damage, a lucky shot through the engine cowling. Carr broke off his attack. He could have stayed. He could have added to his score, but his wingman needed help. Carr escorted the damaged Mustang all the way back to friendly territory, flying close formation, ready to defend if any Germans pursued, forgoing any additional kills to protect his fellow pilot. For this action, he received the Silver Star, the second highest combat decoration for valor. October 29, 1944, another mission over Germany. Another encounter with the enemy. This time, Carr found a pair of Bf-109s flying at high altitude. He climbed above them, positioned himself with the sun at his back, and bounced them from above. The first 109 exploded on his first pass. The pilot never knew what hit him. The second tried to escape, a wild, twisting dive toward the ground. But Carr had learned from his first encounter. He stayed disciplined. He did not chase into the trees. He waited for the German to level out, and then he killed him. 2 more confirmed victories, total confirmed kills, 7.5. The half came from shared credit on the June engagement. Bruce Carr was officially an ace. one of the elite few who had shot down 5 or more enemy aircraft. He was 20 years old. 4 days later, his luck ran out. Chapter 7. The fall November 2nd, 1944. The day that changed everything. The mission was a strafing run against a German airfield in Czechoslovakia. Intelligence reported a concentration of fighter aircraft. The assignment was to destroy as many as possible before they could threaten Allied bombers. Carr led the attack, 4 Mustangs diving out of the afternoon sun, 6 guns per aircraft, 24 streams of 50 caliber fire raking the parked planes. The attack was successful. Several German aircraft were destroyed, ammunition dumps exploded, fuel storage tanks went up in flames, but the Germans fought back. 88mm anti-aircraft guns surrounded the field, the dreaded Act 8, the most effective anti-aircraft weapon of the war. These guns had been killing Allied aircraft since 1939. Their crews were experienced. Their aim was deadly as Carr pulled up from his strafing run. Climbing away from the field, a shell burst just behind his aircraft, close enough to shake the Mustang, close enough to send fragments tearing through the engine compartment. One small piece of steel, no bigger than a man's thumb. It severed the oil line. The rest happened fast. The oil pressure dropped. The engine began to overheat. The Merlin screamed as metal ground against metal. 90 seconds of life remaining. Carr knew immediately what had happened. He had seen other pilots go down this way. He knew the sound of a dying engine. Bail out. That was the only option. He pulled back the canopy. The freezing air rushed in. He rolled the Mustang inverted. He dropped into the sky. The parachute opened. The descent began. And Bruce Carr started calculating his odds. 200 miles behind enemy lines. No radio. No weapon except a .45 pistol. No food. No water. November in Central Europe. 23% chance of making it home. The ground rose up to meet him. Addio. Chapter 8. Impact. Carr hit the frozen Czechoslovakian ground hard. The parachute landing was not gentle. The wind caught his canopy at the last moment, dragged him sideways. He hit the ground at an angle instead of straight down. His left ankle twisted on impact. A bright flash of pain shot up his leg. Not broken. He could feel that immediately, but badly sprained. Bad enough that every step would be agony. He lay still for a moment, catching his breath, letting the pain subside, taking stock of his situation. Around him, the Czechoslovakian forest was silent. The sounds of battle had faded. His squadron was gone. The German airfield was miles away. He was alone. The first thing to do was hide the evidence. He gathered the silk canopy, pulled it close. Then he found a depression in the ground, a small hollow beneath a fallen tree. He stuffed the parachute inside, covered it with leaves and branches. In the fading afternoon light, it was invisible. The Germans would search for him. They always searched when a pilot went down. They knew that enemy airmen carried valuable intelligence, maps, codes, information about upcoming missions. He had maybe 20 minutes before patrols arrived. Carr took stock of his equipment: flight suit, leather jacket, boots, a .45 caliber pistol with 7 rounds in the magazine. His survival kit had been damaged in the bailout. The radio was dead. The compass was cracked. The matches were soaked. 7 bullets, no food, no water, no way to navigate, and 200 miles of enemy territory between him and safety. The mathematics were brutal. A man can survive for 3 weeks without food, but he can only survive for 3 days without water. And in November, with temperatures dropping below freezing at night, a man without shelter might not survive even one night. Carr knew his options. He could move south toward Allied lines. That is what the Germans would expect. That is what every downed pilot tried to do. The Germans would set up roadblocks. They would search the forests. They would have patrols covering every likely escape route. Or he could do something unexpected. Carr looked north, toward the German airfield, toward the enemy, and he started walking. The second lesson: when everyone expects you to retreat, advance. Most people, when faced with danger, do exactly what their enemy expects. They run, they hide, they play defense, they move away from the threat as fast as they can. Bruce Carr did the opposite. He moved toward the threat, not away from it. He knew that the safest place to be was the last place anyone would look for him. Think about it. The Germans would search outward from his landing site. They would set up a perimeter. They would send patrols south and west, toward Allied lines. They would watch the roads. They would check the farmhouses. They would not expect an American pilot to walk toward their airfield. This principle applies to more than warfare. In business, when competition expects you to retreat, that is often exactly when you should advance. When your competitors expect you to cut prices, sometimes the winning move is to raise them. When everyone expects you to play it safe, sometimes the bold move creates opportunities that caution never could. In relationships, when someone expects you to react with anger, responding with calm changes the dynamic completely. When someone expects you to withdraw, engaging more deeply catches them off guard. In life, when everyone tells you something is impossible, that is often exactly when you should try it. The unexpected move creates confusion. Confusion creates opportunity. Opportunity creates advantage. Carr understood this instinctively. He knew that doing what everyone expected would get him captured or killed, so he did what no one expected. He walked toward the enemy airfield, where there was food, where there was water, where there were aircraft, where there was a way home. Chapter 9. 4 Days in Hell. Day 1. Carr moved through the forest with his weight on his right leg. Every step on his left ankle sent a spike of pain up through his body. But he kept moving. Stopping meant death. He stayed off the roads. Roads meant patrols. Roads meant vehicles. Roads meant capture. Instead, he pushed through the underbrush, through thickets of thorns that tore at his flight suit, through muddy stream beds that soaked his boots, through dense stands of pine that blocked out what little daylight remained. By nightfall, he had covered maybe 3 miles. 3 miles in 6 hours. His normal walking pace would have covered 15. The temperature dropped as the sun went down. His breath came out in clouds of white vapor. His wet boots began to freeze. His fingers grew numb. He found a hollow beneath a fallen log and crawled inside, pulled dead leaves over himself for insulation, and shivered through the longest night of his life. He did not sleep. Sleep was too dangerous. Sleep would lower his body temperature. Sleep might be permanent. Instead, he lay in the darkness and listened. The forest was full of sounds, animals moving through the underbrush, branches cracking in the cold. In the distance, the rumble of artillery along the front lines, and once, sometime after midnight, the sound of German voices, a patrol passing within 100 yards of his hiding spot, flashlight beams cutting through the trees. He did not breathe, did not move, pressed himself flat against the frozen ground, and waited. The voices faded. The flashlights moved away. He was still free. Day 2. Dawn came gray and cold. His body ached from the night on the frozen ground. His ankle had swollen to twice its normal size. His stomach growled with hunger. He had not eaten in 18 hours, and he would not eat today. He found a stream and drank. The water was cold enough to numb his throat, cold enough to make his teeth ache, but it was clean. It would keep him alive for another day. He continued north, slower now. His ankle was getting worse, not better. Each step was a negotiation between his will and his body. Sometime in the afternoon, he heard engines. He dropped flat behind a fallen tree and watched. A German patrol, 200 yards away, moving through the forest in a skirmish line. A dozen soldiers with rifles. A sergeant shouting orders. They were looking for him. Carr lay motionless in a ditch for 2 hours while they searched. 2 hours, face down in the frozen mud, not moving, barely breathing, listening to German voices calling to each other as they swept the area. They passed within 50 feet of his position, close enough to hear them complaining about the cold, close enough to smell their cigarette smoke. They did not find him. Day 3. The hunger became impossible to ignore. A human body at rest burns approximately 2,000 calories a day. A body under stress, in cold weather, moving through difficult terrain, burns far more. Carr was burning perhaps 4,000 calories a day, just staying warm and mobile. He had consumed 0. His body began cannibalizing itself, burning muscle tissue for energy when the fat reserves ran low. His hands shook constantly now, his vision occasionally blurred, his thoughts came slower, foggier, like thinking through mud. He knew these were signs of dangerous malnutrition. He knew that if he did not eat soon, he would become too weak to continue. He made a decision. Tomorrow, he would surrender. The Luftwaffe treated captured pilots better than the Wehrmacht or the SS. Aviators had a code. They respected fellow flyers, even enemy ones. A pilot who surrendered to Luftwaffe personnel had a reasonable chance of survival. Carr knew pilots who had spent time in Stalag Luft 3, the famous prisoner of war camp for downed airmen. They described it as boring but survivable. 3 meals a day. Red Cross packages with chocolate and cigarettes. Letters from home. Perhaps even the possibility of escape, like the Great Escape that had happened earlier that year. It was not freedom, but it beat starving to death in a Czechoslovakian forest. Carr made up his mind. Tomorrow morning, he would walk to the airfield with his hands up. He would spend the rest of the war as a prisoner. At least he would be alive. Chapter 10. The Discovery Day 4. Late afternoon. Carr had reached the edge of the German airfield. He was positioned in a tree line overlooking the eastern perimeter. Through the branches, he could see the operations area clearly: hangars, fuel trucks, maintenance buildings, a control tower with a large swastika flag, and aircraft, dozens of aircraft, FW-190s, mostly, Germany's premier fighter. The aircraft that had given Allied pilots nightmares since 1941, sleek and deadly, with their distinctive radial engines and wide landing gear. A few Bf-109s as well. The older design, still dangerous, but being replaced by the more advanced Focke-Wulf. Some Junkers, Ju-88s, twin-engine bombers, the same type Carr had been attacking when he was shot down. The airfield was busy. Ground crews worked on aircraft. Trucks moved supplies. Officers walked between buildings. Tomorrow morning, Carr would walk to the main gate and surrender. He would become another statistic, another captured American pilot, another prisoner of war. But as darkness fell, Bruce Carr noticed something: a revetment, a U-shaped earthen barrier designed to protect an aircraft from bomb blasts. It was located 80 yards from his position, just at the edge of the active area. Inside the revetment sat a Focke-Wulf FW-190, partially concealed by camouflage netting, separated from the main activity of the airfield. Two German mechanics were working on the aircraft under portable lights. Carr watched. They checked the fuel level. They opened a panel on the wing and inspected something inside. They added oil to the engine. Then they ran up the engine. The distinctive sound of the BMW 801 radial roaring to life. A deep, throaty roar that was nothing like the smooth whine of the Merlin in his Mustang. They cycled the propeller, checked the magnetos, let the engine warm up. Then they ran through what appeared to be a complete pre-flight inspection. After 20 minutes, they shut it down, covered the cockpit with a canvas sheet, and walked back toward the main hangars. The FW-190 was ready to fly. Carr's brain began calculating. Numbers and possibilities clicking through his mind like the workings of a machine. He had never flown a German aircraft. He did not speak German. He had no idea where the controls were, how the engine started, how the landing gear operated. But he knew how to fly. He had logged over 500 combat hours. He had flown in every condition imaginable. He had fought and killed in aerial combat. He understood aircraft at a fundamental level that went beyond labels and languages. Every aircraft has a throttle, a stick, rudder pedals. The physics do not change because the labels are in German. And he was looking at a fully fueled fighter aircraft with no guard. The surrender plan began to crumble. A new plan began to form. The third lesson. Opportunity does not wait here is what separated Bruce Carr from the 77% of downed pilots who never made it home. He recognized opportunity when it appeared, and he acted immediately. Most people see opportunity and hesitate. They want more information. They want less risk. They want guarantees that do not exist. They want to think about it, sleep on it, discuss it with someone else. By the time they decide to act, the opportunity is gone. Carr had seconds to make a decision that would determine whether he lived or died, whether he spent the rest of the war in a prison camp, or flew home in a stolen German fighter. He chose to act, not because he knew it would work. He had no idea if it would work. The odds of successfully stealing an enemy fighter were astronomical. The odds of teaching himself to fly it were worse. The odds of actually making it home were infinitesimal. He chose to act because not acting meant accepting a future he was not willing to accept. That is the difference between those who seize their moment and those who watch their moment pass them by. When opportunity appears, it does not send a calendar invite. It does not wait for you to feel ready. It does not give you time to prepare. It shows up, often in disguise, and then it leaves. The only question is whether you will be standing there when it arrives. Ready to move, Bruce Carr was standing there, and he was ready. Chapter 11. The heist car waited until 3 in the morning. The airfield was quiet. The main buildings were dark. A skeleton crew maintained the night watch, but they were concentrated near the control tower and the main hangars. The revetment where the FW-190 sat was on the edge of the field, in shadow, unguarded. It was time. Carr moved out of the tree line. 80 yards of open ground lay between him and the aircraft. No cover, no concealment. If anyone looked in his direction, he was dead. He stayed low, almost crawling. His twisted ankle screamed with every movement, but he kept going. 40 yards. The sounds of the airfield seemed impossibly loud. A generator humming somewhere, a dog barking in the distance, his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. 20 yards. He could see the aircraft clearly now. the distinctive shape of the FW-190, the radial engine cowling, the wide landing gear, 10 yards. He was at the edge of the revetment. The earthen walls rose around him, blocking sight lines from the rest of the field. He had made it. The FW-190 was larger than he expected. Wingspan 34 feet, length 29 feet, empty weight 7,000 pounds, nearly a ton heavier than his P-51. The cockpit sat high on the fuselage, protected by 30 millimeters of armored glass. The BMW 801 engine dominated the nose, a 14-cylinder, air-cooled radial producing 1,700 horsepower. This was Germany's premier fighter, the Würger, the butcher bird. First deployed in 1941, it had outclassed the British Spitfire so thoroughly that the RAF had rushed development of new variants just to compete. German pilots loved it for its ruggedness, its firepower, its excellent visibility. Allied pilots feared it. The aircraft Carr was about to climb into was likely an A8 variant, the most common model in late 1944. Standard armament included two 13mm MG-131 machine guns, synchronized to fire through the propeller arc. Four 20mm MG-151 cannons mounted in the wings. More firepower than the P-51 Mustang. Maximum speed 408 miles per hour, range 500 miles, service ceiling over 37,000 feet, a deadly machine in the hands of an experienced pilot. Bruce Carr was not an experienced FW-190 pilot. He had never sat in one before. He had never seen the inside of one. Everything he knew about this aircraft came from gun camera footage of them exploding under his guns. He was about to learn to fly it, in the dark, on a German airfield, with his life depending on getting it right. Chapter 12. Learning in the dark. Carr climbed onto the wing. The metal was cold and slick with frost. He steadied himself against the fuselage. The canopy was unlocked. The German mechanics had not bothered to secure it. Why would they? This was an active military airfield, deep in friendly territory. Who would steal an aircraft? Carr slid the canopy back and dropped into the cockpit. The first thing he noticed, he could not read anything. Every label, every gauge, every switch, all in German, Gothic script that was almost impossible to decipher, even in good light. In the darkness of the pre-dawn, the instrument panel was a wall of incomprehensible symbols. The second thing he noticed, the cockpit was smaller than the P-51's. His knees pressed against the instrument panel. His shoulders brushed the canopy rails. The German pilots must be smaller than Americans, he thought, but some things were the same. The control stick fell naturally to his right hand. The throttle was on the left. Same as every American aircraft. Some things are universal. Carr had approximately 4 hours until sunrise. He used every minute. He traced wiring with his fingers. He identified gauges by their position and their movement. Airspeed indicators are usually at the top left, altimeters at the top center, engine instruments clustered on the right. He found the fuel selector by following the fuel lines, the magneto switches by their shape, the propeller control by its position near the throttle. The starter was the critical piece. In the P-51, the engine started with an electrical system, push a button. The starter motor engaged. The engine turned over. Simple. But different aircraft used different systems. Some used cartridge starters, essentially small explosive charges that spun the engine. Some used hand cranks. Some used inertia starters that required winding up like a toy before engaging. Carr did not know what system the FW-190 used. On the right side of the cockpit, He found a T-shaped handle with German text. The word looked vaguely like Anlasser, starter. He pulled it. Nothing happened. He pushed it. A mechanical whine filled the cockpit. An inertia starter. The flywheel began spinning up, storing energy like a wound spring. He let it spin for 10 seconds, 20 seconds. The whine became a high-pitched scream. Then he pulled the handle again. The BMW 801 coughed, sputtered, caught, and roared to life. The noise was apocalyptic. 1,700 horsepower at idle still sounds like thunder. The aircraft shook with the vibration. The propeller became an invisible disc in front of him. Every German on the airfield would hear it. Carr had seconds. The fourth lesson. You do not need to know everything to begin. Most people wait until they understand everything before they start. They want to read every book, take every course, master every detail. They want to feel ready before they begin. Bruce Carr sat in a cockpit where he could not read a single word. He did not know how the engine started. He figured it out. He did not know how the landing gear worked. He would figure that out too. He did not know if the guns were loaded or if the fuel was contaminated, or if 100 other things might kill him. He started anyway. He figured out what he needed to know in the moment he needed to know it, not before. This is how extraordinary things get done. Not by waiting until you feel ready, but by starting before you feel ready. And solving problems as they appear. Perfectionism is just fear wearing a mask. The mask says, I am being careful. I am being thorough. I am being responsible. But underneath, fear is saying, I am afraid to fail. I am afraid to look foolish. I am afraid to try and not succeed. Bruce Carr was afraid too. Terrified. Probably. Sitting in an enemy aircraft, surrounded by enemy soldiers, about to attempt something no American had ever done. But he started the engine anyway. That is the difference. Chapter 13. Takeoff Carr did not have time to find the runway. The engine noise would bring soldiers running. He had perhaps 60 seconds before the first Germans arrived at the revetment, perhaps 90 seconds before they started shooting. He had to go now. He shoved the throttle forward. The BMW 801 roared. The aircraft lurched against its brakes. The propeller wash blasted debris from the revetment walls. Carr released the brakes. The FW-190 began to roll. The tail came up almost immediately. This aircraft was nose-heavy, eager to fly. The massive engine in front wanted to pull the nose down, which meant the tail came up quickly on takeoff. Through the pre-dawn darkness, Carr aimed between two hangars. It was the widest open space he could see, not a runway, just a gap between buildings. Ground crew were emerging now, shouting, pointing. One man ran toward the aircraft, waving his arms, 60 miles per hour. The aircraft accelerated faster than the Mustang. The radial engine was powerful and responsive. 70 miles per hour. The hangars rushed toward him. He could see windows now, lights coming on inside. 80 miles per hour. Not quite flying speed. Not enough lift to get airborne. The gap between the hangars looked impossibly narrow. Maybe 100 feet of clearance. His wingspan was 34 feet on each side. At 90 miles per hour, Carr pulled back on the stick. The FW-190 leaped into the air. The wheels cleared the ground. The aircraft began to climb. The hangar roofs rushed toward him. He could see individual tiles, individual rivets. He cleared them by what felt like inches. He was airborne, in a stolen German fighter, 200 miles behind enemy lines, at 3 a.m, with no idea how to operate most of the aircraft's systems, Now came the hard part. Chapter 14, Flying Blind. The FW-19, O's cockpit was a nightmare of unfamiliar systems. But Carr solved problems one at a time. That was the only way to survive. Landing gear. The gear was still down, creating drag, slowing him down, making him an easier target. He found a lever on the left console, pulled it, nothing happened. He pushed it, a satisfying thunk, hydraulic pressure. The gear began to retract. The airspeed increased. The aircraft became more streamlined. Good. Compass. He needed to know which way was west, which way was France, which way was home. He identified the gyro compass by its position and movement. The needle pointed roughly northeast. He was flying the wrong direction. He banked left, turned southwest, toward the front lines, toward safety, altitude. He climbed to 500 feet. Then he reconsidered. At altitude, he was visible. Visible to German radar. Visible to German fighters that might be scrambling to intercept the stolen aircraft. Visible to anti-aircraft batteries that tracked everything that moved. He dropped to treetop level, 50 feet above the ground, 280 miles per hour. The Czechoslovakian forest became a green blur beneath his wings. Trees flashed past so fast they merged into a solid mass. One mistake, one moment of inattention, one slight pull on the stick at the wrong moment, and he would cartwheel through the trees at 300 miles per hour. But at treetop level, he was invisible to radar. He was too low for heavy anti-aircraft guns to track. He was too fast for riflemen to target. The fuel gauge showed full tanks. The FW-190 had a range of approximately 500 miles. France was 200 miles away. He had margin for error. For 45 minutes, Carr flew west. The sun rose behind him. The terrain changed beneath him. Forests gave way to farmland. Farmland gave way to the scarred battlefields of eastern France. He crossed the front lines, and that was when his problems really began. Chapter 15, Shot at by friends, Allied anti-aircraft gunners saw what they expected to see. A German FW-190, flying at low altitude, heading toward Allied positions. They did not see an American pilot. They did not see an escaped prisoner. They did not see a hero flying home. They saw an enemy. And they opened fire. 50 caliber tracers arced toward Carr from every direction. Red and orange streams of fire reaching up from the ground. The distinctive sound of machine gun fire, even over the roar of his engine. He was taking fire from his own side. Carr had no radio to announce himself. The German aircraft had a German radio, tuned to German frequencies. Even if he could figure out how to operate it, he would be broadcasting to the wrong people. He had no way to signal that he was friendly. No recognition signals, no flares, no markings. The FW-190 still carried German insignia, the black crosses on the wings, the swastika on the tail. Every visual cue screamed enemy. Carr did the only thing he could. He flew lower and faster. He dropped to 20 feet, hedge-hopping, flying so low that his propeller wash kicked up dust from the roads below, flying so low that French civilians dived into ditches as he screamed overhead. American soldiers fired rifles at him. Machine gun nests opened up. Every 50 caliber gun in northern France seemed to be shooting at Bruce Carr. He later estimated that every anti-aircraft weapon in existence took shots at him during that 30-mile sprint to his home base. The FW-190 took hits. He could hear the impacts, metallic thuds, as rounds struck the fuselage. The aircraft shuddered with each hit. But the German engineering held. The aircraft kept flying. Ahead, He recognized the terrain, the distinctive pattern of fields and roads, the layout of a military airfield. A 66 at Rosières-en-Haye, France, home of the 354th Fighter Group. His home. He lined up for approach. No time for pattern work. No time for radio calls. The anti-aircraft batteries on the field were already tracking him. A German fighter was approaching their base. They were preparing to blow him out of the sky. And that was when Carr discovered the final problem. The landing gear would not come down. Chapter 16, No Way Down. Carr pulled the lever. Nothing. He pumped it. Nothing. He looked for a backup system, an emergency release, a manual crank, anything. The FW-190's landing gear operated on hydraulic pressure. There was a selector valve that directed pressure either to retraction or extension, a small lever that determined which way the hydraulics pushed. Carr did not know this. He did not know which lever controlled the valve. He did not know that he had been pulling the wrong handle for the last 5 minutes. Below him, his own base was trying to kill him. The 40mm Bofors guns were traversing, tracking him as he circled, loading high-explosive rounds that would tear his aircraft apart. In the control tower, men were shouting, phones were ringing, the air raid alarm was sounding. Carr made a decision. He was going to belly land. A belly landing in a fighter aircraft is dangerous under the best circumstances. Without landing gear, the aircraft comes down directly on its fuselage. The propeller strikes the ground first. The engine digs in. The aircraft can flip, can cartwheel, can explode if the fuel tanks rupture. But it was his only option. He lined up with the grass beside the main runway. Not the concrete. Grass would be more forgiving. Would slow him down faster. He lowered the flaps. That lever. At least, he had figured out. The aircraft slowed, became more stable. He cut the throttle. The engine died. The propeller windmilled to a stop. The FW-190 sank. 100 feet, 50 feet, 20 feet. The aircraft hit the grass at 90 miles per hour. The impact was violent. The propeller shattered against the ground. The engine dug a furrow in the earth. The aircraft slid sideways, threw up a rooster tail of mud and debris, 300 yards, sliding, slowing, the screech of metal against earth. And then silence. Bruce Carr sat in the ruined cockpit, alive. Chapter 17. Homecoming within seconds. The FW-190 was surrounded. Military police came running from every direction, rifles raised, shouting commands. They had been told a German aircraft was attacking their base. They expected a German pilot. They expected an enemy. Get out of the aircraft. Hands where we can see them. Do not move or we will shoot. Carr raised his hands, slid back the canopy, climbed out onto the wing. He was covered in mud. His flight suit was torn. His face was gaunt from 4 days, without food. He looked like a refugee, a vagabond, not like an American officer. The MPs kept their rifles trained on him, fingers on triggers, ready to fire at the first sign of hostile action. Carr spoke. His voice was hoarse, cracked from days without proper water. I am Captain Carr, of this goddamn squadron. Nobody believed him. Captain Carr was dead, or captured. He had been shot down 4 days ago over Czechoslovakia, 200 miles behind enemy lines. No one survived that. And yet, here was a man, climbing out of a German fighter, claiming to be the missing pilot. The MPs were not taking chances. They kept their weapons aimed, called for backup, waited for someone in authority to sort this out. A staff car came racing across the field, sliding to a stop near the wrecked FW-190. Colonel George Bickle stepped out, the commanding officer of the 354th Fighter Group, a tall man with a hard face and harder eyes, a man who had seen everything this war could throw at him, or so he thought. Bickle looked at the wrecked aircraft, German markings, swastika on the tail, a belly landing that had torn up 100 yards of his grass. He looked at the pilot, mud-covered, exhausted, barely standing, and he recognized him. Carr. The colonel's voice was equal parts disbelief and annoyance. Where in the hell have you been, and what have you been doing now? The story spread through the Army Air Forces like wildfire. The pilot who stole a German plane, the only American in the European theater to take off in a P-51 and return in an FW-190. Bruce Carr had beaten the odds. He had done what no one thought was possible. But his war was not over. The fifth lesson. The impossible only looks impossible until someone does it for 4 days. Bruce Carr was just another statistic, another downed pilot behind enemy lines, another man whose odds of survival were 23%. Then he did something no one had ever done before. The moment he lifted off in that stolen FW-190, he proved that the impossible was possible. He proved that the rules everyone accepted were not rules at all. They were assumptions. Here is what most people never understand about impossible things. They are only impossible until the first person does them. After that, they become possible, then normal, then expected. Before Roger Bannister ran a 4-minute mile in 1954, medical experts believed it was physically impossible. The human body, they said, was not capable of running that fast for that distance. It would cause heart failure. It would cause death. Bannister ran it anyway, 4 minutes flat. Within 3 years, 16 other runners had broken 4 minutes. The impossible became possible the moment someone proved it could be done. Before Bruce Carr, stealing a German fighter and flying it home was unthinkable. After Bruce Carr, it was a story told in every officers' club in Europe, a proof of concept, a demonstration that the impossible was merely the untried. What impossible thing are you not attempting because everyone says it cannot be done? What would happen if you tried anyway? Idinart Chapter 18:4 against 65 months later. April 2nd, 1945, near Schweinfurt, Germany. The war was almost over. Everyone knew it. The Allies were deep into Germany. The Soviet armies were approaching from the east. Hitler was in his bunker. The 1,000-year Reich was dying, but dying enemies are still dangerous. The Luftwaffe was crippled, but not dead. German pilots still flew, still fought, still killed. First Lieutenant Bruce Carr was leading a flight of 4 P-51s on a reconnaissance mission, checking the roads ahead of the advancing American armies, looking for enemy concentrations. They were at 15,000 feet when Carr spotted movement above them. German fighters. A lot of German fighters. More than he could count at first glance. He did a quick estimate, 60 aircraft, maybe more, stacked in a massive formation from 18,000 to 25,000 feet. BF-109, G-10S, and FW-190D-9S. The latest variants of both aircraft, the best Germany had left. He had 4 P-51s. The German formation was preparing to intercept a bomber stream. American B-17 and B-24s were hitting targets deep in Germany every day now. The Luftwaffe marshaled everything they had to stop them. 60 fighters was a desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort, everything they could put in the air. Standard tactics dictated immediate evasion. 4 against 60 is not odds. 4 against 60 is suicide. The Germans had altitude advantage. They were higher. They had more potential energy. The Germans had numerical advantage. 15 to 1. Overwhelming superiority. The Germans had positional advantage. They were above, and they were between Carr's flight and home. Every manual ever written said the same thing. Disengage and report. Get out alive. Let the bomber escorts know what is coming. Live to fight another day. Bruce Carr had never been particularly interested in what the manual said. He keyed his radio. One word, engaging. His wingmen did not hesitate. They had flown with Carr before. They knew what he was capable of. They knew that when Carr said, engaging, he meant it. The 4 Mustangs climbed into the German formation. Chapter 19. The Greatest Battle. What happened next was one of the most remarkable air battles of World War II. The Germans did not expect an attack. They were flying in a loose defensive formation, conserving fuel, saving energy for the bomber interception. They knew Allied fighters were in the area. They expected to be left alone until they reached their target. 4 American fighters climbing directly into their midst made no tactical sense. It was irrational. It was suicidal. It was the last thing they expected. Carr used the confusion. He slipped into the back of the formation. The lowest aircraft were not watching below. They were watching ahead, watching for the bombers. Carr positioned himself behind a BF-109, 50 yards, perfect firing range. He pressed the trigger. 650 caliber machine guns roared, 100 rounds per second. The tracer streams converged on the German fighter. The 109 exploded. The pilot never saw him, never knew what killed him. Carr shifted to another target, an FW-190 banking left. 3 seconds of sustained fire. The Focke-Wulf rolled inverted, trailed smoke, plummeted toward the earth. 2 kills in less than 30 seconds. The German formation began to scatter. They did not know how many Americans were attacking. They did not know where the fire was coming from. Confusion spread through the ranks. Carr moved through them like a wolf through sheep, picking targets, firing, moving, never staying in one place long enough to become a target himself. 3rd kill. A 109 trying to dive away. Carr followed him down, caught him at 400 miles per hour, sent him spinning into the German countryside. 4th kill. Another FW-190. This one saw him coming, tried to turn, but the Mustang turned tighter. Carr cut inside him, got a deflection shot. The German fighter came apart in midair. 5th kill. A 109 climbing for altitude, trying to escape. Carr climbed after him. The Mustang was better at altitude. He caught the German at 22,000 feet. One long burst. The Messerschmitt fell away, burning, in the space of 3 minutes. First Lieutenant Bruce Carr shot down 5 German aircraft. His wingmen were busy too. They had followed his lead, attacked without hesitation, fought with the same aggressive spirit between them. 4 American pilots destroyed 15 German aircraft, a quarter of the entire formation, 0 American losses. When the ammunition ran out, Carr led his flight home. The surviving Germans, 45 of them, scattered across the German countryside. Their attack on the bomber stream never materialized. The 6th lesson. Audacity creates its own advantage. Why did 4 pilots defeat 60? The answer is not skill alone. Though Carr and his wingmen were exceptional pilots, the answer is not luck. Though luck played its part, the answer is audacity. The Germans could not process what was happening because what was happening made no sense. 4 aircraft attacking 60 violates every principle of warfare. It is irrational. It is suicidal. It is not something a sane commander would ever order. And that is exactly why it worked. When you do what your enemy cannot imagine, you create confusion. Confusion slows decision-making. Slow decisions create vulnerability. Vulnerability creates defeat. The German pilots wasted precious seconds trying to understand what was happening, trying to count the attackers, trying to form a defensive response. Those seconds were fatal. By the time they organized a response, 5 of them were dead and the Americans were gone. This principle applies beyond combat, in business, in competition, in life. The person who does what no one expects gains an advantage that skill alone cannot provide. Not recklessness. Bruce Carr was not reckless. He calculated his odds. He used surprise. He exploited confusion. He struck fast and hard before the enemy could organize. Audacity is not the absence of thought. It is thought combined with action that others are too afraid to take. The timid may survive, but they rarely win. Chapter 20. The Recognition, April 9th, 1945. 1 week after the air battle over Schweinfurt, Bruce Carr was promoted to captain, the Distinguished Service. Cross was awarded for his actions on April 2nd, the second highest military decoration for valor, just below the Medal of Honor. The citation reads, completely disregarding his personal safety and the enemy's overwhelming numerical superiority and tactical advantage of altitude. Captain Carr led his element in a direct attack on the hostile force, personally destroying 5 enemy aircraft and damaging still another. Captain Carr's extraordinary heroism and selfless devotion to duty were in keeping with the highest traditions of military service. Carr became the last ace in a day in the European theater of World War II. An ace in a day means shooting down 5 enemy aircraft in a single mission. It is one of the rarest achievements in aerial combat. In the entire European Air War, only a handful of American pilots accomplished it. No American pilot would match Carr's feat before Germany surrendered 1 month later. By the end of the war, Bruce Carr had flown 172 combat missions. He had accumulated 14 or 15 confirmed aerial victories. The records differ on the exact count, plus numerous ground kills from strafing attacks. He was 21 years old. He had survived being shot down over enemy territory. He had stolen a German fighter and flown it home. He had attacked 60 enemy aircraft with 3 wingmen and destroyed a quarter of them, and he was just getting started. Chapter 21. 3 Wars. The war in Europe ended in May of 1945. Bruce Carr stayed in uniform. He joined the Acrojets, America's first jet aerobatic demonstration team, flying the F-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter. The Acrojets performed at air shows across the country, demonstrating the capabilities of jet aircraft to the American public. Showing what the future of aviation looked like, Carr loved it. The speed, the precision, the challenge of formation, aerobatics, at speeds previous generations could not have imagined. Then Korea, June 25, 1950, North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea. America was at war again. Captain Bruce Carr flew 57 combat missions in F-86 Sabres with the 336th Fighter Interceptor Squadron. The Sabre was the best American fighter of its era, a swept-wing jet that could match the Soviet MiG-15S that appeared over the Korean skies. Different war, different aircraft, same pilot. Carr did not achieve ace status in Korea. The opportunities were fewer. The enemy was more skilled. The MiG pilots were often Soviet instructors, flying under North Korean colors. But he survived. He fought. He came home. He commanded the 336th from 1955 to 1956. Colonel's eagles on his shoulders, the kid from Union Springs, New York, running a fighter squadron, then Vietnam. Colonel Bruce Carr, now 44 years old, an age when most pilots have long since retired, an age when desk jobs and staff positions beckon. Carr flew combat 286 missions in F-100 Super Sabres, close air support, bombing runs, strafing missions, the same work he had done 24 years earlier in a different war in a different aircraft over a different continent, the jungle below instead of forests, rice paddies instead of wheat fields, Viet Cong instead of Wehrmacht, but the fundamentals remained the same. Find the enemy, attack the enemy, come home alive. 3 wars, 3 aircraft generations, propeller, jet, supersonic, 515 combat missions total. Colonel Bruce Carr retired from the United States Air Force in 1973. 31 years of service. A career that spanned the entire jet age. Chapter 22, The Final Flight, in 1997, 1 year before his death. Colonel Bruce Carr flew one more time. Kermit Weeks owned a museum called Fantasy of Flight in Florida, one of the finest collections of vintage aircraft in the world. Weeks had invited Carr to appear at an air show. The 73-year-old colonel arrived in a P-51D Mustang, his own aircraft, maintained in flying condition, the same type of plane he had flown over Germany 50 years earlier, the same type of plane he had lost over Czechoslovakia before stealing the Focke-Wulf. He came in over the crowd at 300 knots, 50 feet off the deck, the same approach he had used half a century earlier. Flying into his own base in a stolen German fighter, while his own side tried to shoot him down. Some things, apparently, never change. The crowd watched a 73-year-old man throw a World War II fighter through maneuvers that would challenge pilots half his age, loops that pressed him into his seat at 4 times the force of gravity. Rolls that spun the horizon in a blur of blue and green, chandelle that exchanged speed for altitude and altitude for position, maneuvers that would gray out younger men, maneuvers that required split-second timing and perfect coordination of hands and feet and eyes. The old warrior had not lost his edge. When he landed, someone asked him what he was thinking up there, what went through his mind when he was pulling those high G maneuvers at an age when most men struggle to get out of a chair. Carr shrugged, the same laconic response he had given his entire life. Same thing I was always thinking. What is the airplane capable of? What am I capable of? Let us find out. That was Bruce Carr, in one sentence, the constant push against limits, the refusal to accept that something could not be done, not recklessness, curiosity, determination, the endless question of what more could be achieved. Chapter 23, The Final Mission. April 25th, 1998, St. Cloud, Florida. Bruce Ward. Carr died of prostate cancer. He was 74 years old. They buried him in Arlington National Cemetery. Section 64, Grave 6922. Arlington is where America buries its heroes. The grounds roll gently across Virginia hills. White headstones marking the resting places of men and women who served their country in every conflict since the Revolution. Carr's grave sits among them. Within sight of the tomb of the unknown soldier, across the river from the Lincoln Memorial, surrounded by generals and admirals and Medal of Honor recipients, the headstone lists his rank, Colonel, United States Air Force. It lists his decorations: Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Legion of Merit, Distinguished Flying Cross with clusters, Air Medal with clusters, Purple Heart. It lists his wars: World War II, Korea, Vietnam. It does not mention the Focke-Wulf. It does not mention the 4 days in the Czechoslovakian forest, the frozen nights without food, the German patrols passing within feet of his hiding place. It does not mention teaching himself to fly an enemy aircraft in the dark, the terrifying takeoff between 2 hangars, the belly landing with no gear while his own side shot at him. It does not mention the day he led 4 aircraft against 60 and won. Some stories do not fit on headstones. Some stories deserve more. The final lessons, what Bruce Carr teaches us. Let me leave you with what this story teaches us about life. Lesson 1. Preparation creates opportunity. Bruce Carr learned to fly at 15 years old, not because he knew a war was coming, not because anyone told him it would save his life, but because he loved it. When the moment came, when he needed those skills to survive, they were there. 5 years of preparation met 1 moment of opportunity. What are you preparing for without knowing it? What skills are you building today that will matter tomorrow? Lesson 2, when everyone expects you to retreat. Advance. Carr moved toward the German airfield when every instinct said run. He walked toward danger when everyone expected him to flee. The unexpected move creates confusion. Confusion creates opportunity. The safest path is often the one no one expects you to take. When the world expects you to retreat, consider advancing. Lesson 3. Opportunity does not wait. Carr had seconds to decide whether to steal the plane. Seconds between surrender and freedom. He acted immediately. Most people hesitate. They want more information, more certainty, more safety. By the time they decide, the opportunity is gone. When your moment comes, act. Do not wait for certainty that will never arrive. Lesson 4. You do not need to know everything to begin. Carr could not read a single word in that cockpit. He did not understand the systems. He did not know how most of the controls worked. He started the engine anyway. Perfectionism is fear wearing a mask. You do not need to know everything to begin. You only need to begin. The learning happens in the doing. Lesson 5. The impossible only looks impossible until someone does it before Carr. No one had stolen a German fighter and flown it home. It was unthinkable, impossible. After Carr, it was possible, proven, done. What impossible thing are you not attempting because everyone says it cannot be done? What would happen if you tried anyway? Lesson 6. Audacity creates its own advantage. 4 against 60 made no tactical sense. It violated every principle of combat. That is why it worked. When you do what no one expects, you create confusion. Confusion creates opportunity. The timid may survive, but they rarely win. Closing the question that changes everything. There are 2 ways to tell the story of Bruce Carr. The first is the legend, the downed pilot who stole a German fighter from an active airfield, figured out the controls by trial and error, flew 200 miles back to Allied territory while every gun in Europe shot at him. The second is the documented record, the ace with 15 kills, the Silver Star recipient, the Distinguished Service Cross winner, the man who led 4 aircraft against 60 and won, the colonel who flew 515 combat missions across 3 wars. Both are true. Both are remarkable. But here is what matters most. In November of 1944, an American pilot found himself alone, unarmed, starving, freezing, stranded 200 miles behind enemy lines. The rational choice was surrender. The safe choice was giving up. The statistics said he would spend the rest of the war in a prison camp. Bruce Carr chose differently. He looked at a German fighter aircraft covered in unfamiliar instruments, and he saw not an obstacle, but an opportunity. He climbed into a cockpit he had never seen, started an engine he had never operated, flew an aircraft he had never touched before, not because he was reckless, because he refused to accept that his options were limited to the ones that seemed possible. 4 months later, faced with 60 enemy fighters and 4 friendly aircraft, he made the same calculation. The rational choice was retreat. The safe choice was survival. He chose attack. And 15 German pilots never made it home. The Bruce Carr story is not really about a stolen fighter, not about 15 kills, not about 3 wars and 515 combat missions. The story is simpler than that. The story is about a pilot who looked at impossible odds and asked one question: what else can I do? That question saved his life in a Czechoslovakian forest. It made him an ace in a day over Germany. It defined a career spanning 3 decades and 3 wars. And it can change your life too. The next time you face impossible odds. The next time everyone says there is no way. The next time the rational choice is surrender, ask yourself what Bruce Carr would ask. What else can I do? Then go find out. If this story inspired you, make sure to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Every week, I share true stories of ordinary people who accomplished extraordinary things, and the lessons you can apply to your own life. Leave a comment below. Tell me what impossible challenge you are facing right now. What would change if you asked yourself, what else can I do? I read every comment, and I would love to hear your story. Until next time, end of script. Anil. Disclaimer. This story is created solely for educational and informational purposes. It aims to provide relationship guidance and awareness, not to target or identify any individual. The events and characters depicted are entirely fictional, intended for entertainment and learning. Our content is advertiser-friendly and does not promote hate, offense, or harm in any form. The goal is to help viewers gain insights and make informed decisions based on life experiences.